Welcome back to the Rest Day with Jack Haig. This is going to be a bit of a different episode. This time, it's just myself. I'm not chatting to anyone else. I sat down about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and just sort of recorded a bit of a solo podcast talking about the first part of the season in Europe, sort of how I've been struggling a little bit, how being a professional athlete can be quite hard sometimes. But the good news is I'm starting to feel quite a bit better. The team's been supportive of getting me back on track, and I just thought it'd be interesting to share some insights and show everybody that it's not necessarily always just sunshine and rainbows as a professional cyclist, and you go through bad periods where sometimes you have no idea why, but it is what it is. And I hope you guys can take something out of this episode. If you liked it, let me know, and I'll try and do maybe a couple more of these check-ins throughout the year. Hope you enjoy. I started my season off in Australia, in Tour Down Under. And when we're kind of setting out the goals and objectives for my season, we said that Down Under wasn't going to be a massive objective and that we were just going to go there to use it as a racing experience. It's been a long time since I've been back to Australia, and I just wanted to go back to Australia, to be honest, and spend a month being back there and just getting some racing in the sunshine instead of being in the European winter. And we didn't really put a big emphasis on making sure that I was going to be at a top level fitness for that race. But obviously, I'm Australian. I went to Tour Under. I wanted to do quite well, and I managed to finish 10th overall in GC, which not a bad result, not a great result, but a solid result to start the season with in a World Tour stage race. And then I spent a tiny bit longer in Australia to see some more friends in Melbourne and sort of hang out a little bit more and avoid coming back to the European winter, especially where I live in Andorra. January, February can be pretty miserable for training on the bike. It's great for skiing, but for bike riding, it's not so nice. And then I came back to Europe. I actually rented an Airbnb for a little bit just outside Girona. I normally don't spend very much time in Girona, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going from the Australian summer back to -5 to 3 degrees in Andorra. And I thought maybe it'd be a little bit better for training and my body to go to Girona, where it would be not quite as cold and a little bit easier. And then I started preparing for my European block of racing, which was going to start off in Vuelta a Andalusia, which eventually ended up actually getting sort of cancelled to an extent. We ended up doing a 5-kilometer individual time trial because there was some protests and they couldn't get enough of the police to help close the roads. And to be honest, I was quite excited to go to Vuelta a Andalusia. I felt like after getting back to Europe, I'd done maybe 2 weeks of quite good training. I was feeling good. I was enjoying being in Girona. The training was a little bit easier than, say, being in Andorra mentally. And then I came back from the cancellation of Vuelta a Andalusia and sort of tried to refocus and build up towards Paris-Nice and Vuelta a Catalunya. The training maybe changed a tiny bit because we missed out on that race intensity that you would normally get from that first block of racing. And I guess maybe to talk a little bit more about the training, maybe some people are aware of a training method called block periodization, where you would do, for example, 1 week or 5-6 days of really, really high intensity work, and then the next 3 weeks kind of just maintaining that high intensity. And I guess sometimes in the World Tour, we use these early season races a little bit like that block periodization, where you would get a really high stimulus of 5 days of very hard racing, and then you would then go home and just do a bit more of the maintenance style for the next couple of weeks, and then I would go off to Paris-Nice. So maybe the training changed a little bit, and we went and did a bit more intensity in training while I was in Girona. And one of the things I really noticed when I come down from Andorra not that I live at super high altitude, I live at around 1,300 meters, but just that I can train quite a bit harder and the recovery happens quite a bit faster. So in the next 2 weeks, I did a bit more training leading up to Paris-Nice, and I guess I maybe put quite a bit of pressure on myself to try and do a good result. I've always done quite well in Paris-Nice. I think I've done it 3 or 4 times, and every single time I finished top 10. And this year I really wanted to go back and sort of continue on from that early season 10th place in Tour Down Under. I got a tiny bit sick, maybe 7 days before Paris-Nice, but it was nothing major. I just had a bit of a head cold, blocked sinuses, and sort of adjusted my training around a little bit. And I didn't really think much of it. I did a few, or at least 1 or 2 sort of intensity days before leaving for Paris-Nice. And I remember doing them and I was like, oh, I can do them, but maybe it's a bit harder than it probably should have been. Then I tapered down into Paris-Nice, did the first stage, and always the first stage of Paris-Nice. Maybe if you go back and listen to the comparison podcast that I did with Wout Poels, episode 1, we talk about Paris-Nice and Tirreno. And Paris-Nice, always those first couple of stages, always just hard and a bit of a rude shock because you have the guys from the classics coming back from opening weekend, and you have the climbers there not trying to lose any time in the crosswinds. There's a lot of road furniture around Paris, and it's always just a bit of a shock, and always just doesn't really feel very nice. So after the first stage, I was like, oh man, that was hard. But anyways, Paris-Nice, it's always hard. So I didn't really think much of it. And then we had another stage that wasn't anything special, and then we went into the team's time trial. And the day before Paris-Nice, we did a team's time trial training preparation, which was just a really short, I forget how many, maybe like 3 or 4 kilometers we did 2 times as like a race simulation, just to get used to the formation. And it's not a discipline that we practice a lot, so just to do a small practice beforehand. I remember finishing the simulation and thinking that it felt quite hard, but then again, as an elite athlete, you need to kind of try and forget those things when you're coming just before a race, to not have it play too much on your mind that maybe you're not good enough. So I kept trying to just push it away, and then we did the reconnaissance of the team's time trial, and I think everyone felt that it was a bit harder than what it looked like it would be on paper. And anyway, we went to the start line and I really suffered. I've not done a huge amount of team's time trials in my career, but I've done quite a few, and I've never been dropped. And after maybe 8 kilometers, I was dropped, and I was like, man, like something's off here. Like I'd done really good numbers in training, and I just couldn't recover. And I did my first pull on the front and then the second one, and I had to indicate to the car that maybe we were going a little bit too fast, but the other guys just, rode away, and I got dropped from the team's time trial. I think I was the first guy, which is pretty hard to take mentally when you're meant to be going to the races. Not the GC leader, but I was kind of like the backup GC guy and there to be the last man for Santiago or Peyo. And that was kind of the beginning of this strange, maybe 3-week period that I had where you do a lot of self-reflection and maybe over-analyzation as a professional athlete. You're always hyper-analyzing, or at least I am, and I think most athletes, but maybe I'm just a bit different. You end up hyper-analyzing everything. And I've always tried to be someone that can be quite subjective. I like to look at data. I like to look at trends and all this kind of stuff. But I try not to get too caught up in any certain metric or thinking that any certain thing is the thing that's going to make me perform well. Like I've always tried to make sure I never have any superstitions or I never have any lucky charm or something like this that can affect the performance if you miss that one thing. So yeah, I had 3 weeks of, or the rest of Paris-Nice, just not really feeling very good and suffering a lot. And the most annoying thing was that I felt like I'd sacrificed a lot in the preparation whilst we'd been in Girona, like not just myself, but also my family, my wife and my son. Like they moved from Andorra to come down to Girona to sort of be in a better training environment for myself. I worked really hard in training, weighed all the food or tried to be very good with nutrition. I arrived at a good weight. I arrived thinking that I was going to perform well, and then to perform not like a couple of percent off where I thought I was going to be, but like a long way off was quite hard mentally, I guess. I finished Paris-Nice, and after a bit of self-reflection, I sort of thought, maybe it was I trained too much, or maybe the sickness that I had a week before really sort of got me down and I couldn't perform the way that I wanted to. So the plan was always to do Vuelta a Catalunya, and I thought, okay, let's go really conservative here. I think I had 3 days completely off the bike, and then I did just maybe 2 easy rides, and then I did a 3.5 hour ride with just 2 intervals to try and wake up the body before going to join the team for Vuelta a Catalunya. And I was honestly quite confident again, thinking, okay, Paris-Nice didn't go so well, but got through the race. Hopefully, after being quite conservative, doing not very much, I will have recovered, had a bit of super compensation, and go into Vuelta a Catalunya having a better performance and being able to forget about Paris-Nice and sort of move on. We did the first stage, which is always a bit of a tricky stage, but never crazy hard. And it's sort of this dragging 500, 800 meters uphill sprint finish, but just like a little bit hard all day. And actually finished feeling quite confident, quite good again. And I was like, okay, perfect. I've recovered from whatever had happened, can move on. Then we went into the second stage of Vuelta a Catalunya, which is the Voltaire 2000 mountaintop finish. And I was really focused. I was really motivated to try and do a good performance to sort of put everything behind me. And anyway, I just didn't have the legs, or as soon as we went hard at the bottom of the Voltaire 2000 climb, I just couldn't recover. And then you end up back in this overanalyzation of everything that you did leading up to the race, thinking, maybe I didn't train enough, maybe I trained too much, maybe I'm still suffering from the sickness, or it's hard. And I think it's something that maybe isn't spoken that much about in cycling. I don't know whether it's spoken about more in other professional sports, and also I think it's more prevalent in individual sports. And I guess cycling is this weird mix of both being a team sport and also an individual sport at the same time, where a lot of the times as athletes, we're left alone at home to prepare for long periods of time, where maybe we don't have a lot of contact with the team, and it can be, a bit strange. Then you go into the team environment, whereas in most other team sports like football or basketball, you're training with the team all the time and you're always there around the team staff, and it's very easy to always maybe compare yourself with the other guys around you, but then also have the staff members always monitoring you to make sure everything's going in the right direction. But also how much maybe the mental side of being a professional athlete really weighs on performance. And it's this really hard thing that's not really able to be quantified, which then makes it hard to measure or to say whether you're going well or bad mentally. And I don't think I had a mental problem, but once you start performing badly, I guess people talk about this with World Tour sprinters, that maybe it's not so much about their fitness level. Obviously it's important, but it's more about that confidence, because it's a result that gets made in some split second decisions. And for whatever reason, maybe you make more correct decisions in that heat of the moment when you are confident. And when you're performing badly like I was, you end up in kind of this maybe mentally bad spiral of wondering why. And we did a lot of blood tests. We, as part of the UCI biological passport, every single quarter of the year you need to do a relatively basic blood test. And I did one of them between Paris-Nice and Catalonia because it was time to do my second quarter biological passport. And everything actually looked pretty good. And that was another reason that gave me confidence going into Catalonia. I said, well, I'm not fighting a virus according to my blood test. I seem relatively healthy according to my blood test. So that was one of the reasons that gave me confidence to go into Vuelta a Catalunya. And then Vuelta a Catalunya didn't go well. So we said, okay, let's try and do a more extensive blood test to try and figure out maybe there is something there. Did that, all came back feeling quite good. Like there's nothing really in the blood test. And again, you then start thinking, well, if it's not that, then what is it? Or is it anything? And in the end, I think sometimes just our bodies don't respond to training or the environment or to external stress the way that we think it should. And I just ended up in this weird period where I was looking for something that maybe wasn't there. And in the end, I took basically a week off the bike after Vuelta a Catalunya to try and just reset, both physically and mentally, and then refocus on the rest of the season afterwards. Someone that I ended up finding myself talking about quite a bit to other athletes about this was Geraint Thomas. And I have so much maybe admiration and respect for how he's so good at peaking for one event in the year, or multiple, but specifically last year, I was also preparing for the Giro d'Italia. And I remember throughout the season, I raced with G in Vuelta a Catalunya, and then I also raced with G in Tour de Alps. And both times, G was suffering like so much. I remember thinking how mentally tough and how good you need to be in trusting the process, that when he arrives at the Giro, he's confident in himself that he's going to do well. Because even in Tour de Alps, I was third on GC, Teo won the GC. I was thinking, gave me quite a lot of confidence going into the Giro d'Italia. And I have no idea where G finished, but he wasn't up there. And the Giro only starts maybe 10 days after Tour de Alps. It's not like there's a whole lot of time to change anything. And then, sure enough, G showed his class and he was leading the Giro d'Italia for most of the race, and he went on to finish second. And through this period now that I had of not performing very well when I thought I would, you lose a bit of self-confidence. And I was like, man, it's so impressive how G can have that self-confidence and trust in the process that he will be good at that peak goal that he has for the year. And it's something that I've never been good at, and it's something that I've never really struggled at as a cyclist. I've always been relatively good throughout the season. I've never really been someone that has really high peaks and really low troughs, I guess, and struggled with performance. I've always just sort of consistently done my training and always consistently done well. And maybe something else that I wanted to touch on here was I'm someone that maybe has a bit of an overactive brain, and I like to read about science. I like to look into the details. I think I know quite a bit about nutrition. I think I know quite a bit about training. And you can have all these science studies, you can have all of this stuff, but I think at the end of the day, and it's one of the hardest things to do as a high performance athlete, is to be very self-aware. And I guess that's where the coach-athlete relationship needs to come in. But also, I think you have sometimes two polarizing personalities where you have some athletes that maybe are very bad at being self-aware, but very good at just trusting what someone says. They don't really think about it too much. They don't overanalyze it. They don't question it. They don't read studies. They don't do anything. But if someone says, eat 120 grams of carbs an hour in the race and you'll feel good, they just do it. They don't question it. Or if someone says, do 3 by 20 minutes today, 4 hours, they write out the training program. This is how you're going to be top 5 in Paris-Nice or top 5 in whatever race, or you just need to follow this process. You have some athletes that don't question it. They just tick the box every day and that's their life. Whereas I think you have other athletes, and maybe I'm part of this other category, where I really like to know why I'm doing something. And I guess I always question it because I have quite a large general curiosity. And there's so many different ways to achieve elite performance. And you can read all these different studies. You can talk to different people in different teams. And like some people say that in Visma, Lisa Bike, they do a lot of shorter high intensity intervals. And it's much more either you do like 3 hours in high intensity or quite long 5, 6, 7 hour rides. Whereas in other teams, it's a completely different style of training. And you could do a lot more of that sort of zone 3, zone 4 training. Or then you talk to some guys in UAE, like Pavel, like we spoke about in the previous podcast. He's now changed teams, he's changed coaches, and now he's working with Sam Milan, who is quite famous for prescribing zone 2 work. And it's quite different to what a lot of other people do in other teams, but yet we all go to races and we all perform somewhat similarly. And something that I've always been curious about as well is, as World Tour cyclists or elite cyclists, we all live in different environments. For example, I live in Andorra. A lot of my training is done in the mountains. There's barely any flat roads in Andorra. And it's basically, if you break down my training, in the end, it's basically doing blocks of maybe 20 to 40 minutes. If I'm riding easy, say at 250, 260 watts at 75 RPM at 10 to 15 kilometers an hour, going up on a hill, going down, and then going up a hill again. If I do a 4-hour endurance ride, it might be 3 to 4 long climbs at that kind of intensity. Whereas you look at someone else that, say, lives in Holland or even just lives in Girona, they can do 4-hour endurance ride at 200, 220 watts and basically not stop pedaling for that whole 4-hour ride. But in my instance, I end up coasting down the descent of the mountain. And in the end, it's quite a different 4-hour endurance ride. But yet we can go to a race and both perform very similarly. And yeah, I'm quite fascinated by sports science. And I actually, as part of this process of trying to figure out if there was anything wrong with myself or trying to find an answer to why I wasn't performing maybe where I thought I should or the team thought I should, I did a VO2 max test with basically breath analyzing as well to make sure that I was breathing correctly and that I didn't have any lingering problem with my chest or my breathing or my lungs. And it's something that I've never really done as a professional athlete. It might be a surprise to some people, but I think the last VO2 max test I did was in 2011 or even 2014 maybe. And it doesn't really maybe give anything useful because I think VO2 max isn't maybe the best indicator of who's going to be the best World Tour cyclist. But it was just nice to be in a lab feeling like a very high performance athlete being tested, checking certain things. And then some of the things that we could find from that VO2 max test to try and set training zones is, for example, your ventilatory threshold of VT1 and VT2. And we can use that in training. And that was quite nice because quite often, I think if you talk to, or in my experience anyway, if you talk to some of the guys, we might do lactate testing in December and January training camp, but then you might not do any more testing for the rest of the year. And like all the training prescription is just based off estimations of either training intervals or race intervals. And one side, our sport wants to control a lot of these variables with training intensity and making sure you're prescribing training efforts at this certain wattage. But I think a lot of the times we get very lost in the very fine details of if someone says do an interval at 360 watts, as athletes or majority of athletes, I think they go out and they try to make sure that when they press lap, it's exactly 360 watts. Whereas a lot of the times, it probably doesn't matter exactly what that number is. There's so much day-to-day variability in your body, but then also the power meters that we use now, they're not, or maybe the power meters we've used forever, they're not 100% accurate. And when you actually break down if there's a 2% difference or say a 4% delta, 2% up or down, that's actually quite a lot. Maybe I'm trying to help myself understand that it's all about stressing the body, recovering from that stimulus, and then sort of checking in with yourself to make sure whether you're getting better or you're not getting better. And it can sometimes, if you get too much into the details of making sure you weigh all your food, counting the calories, counting the carbohydrates, making sure you're ticking off all the intervals at the exact wattage that's prescribed, that actually sometimes you need to be just a bit more self-aware and check in with your body as to how it's feeling. Do you feel good? Do you not feel good? But then it's so hard because as, again, elite athletes, we generally always want to do more, which is why we're generally very bad self-coached athletes, because we always probably want to do too much than we should. And I was having this conversation with another rider, and he said his coach sometimes puts into the training program, do 3 to 4 intervals at, for example, 360 to 380 watts. And then we were joking. We're like, well, yeah, that means do 4 intervals at 380 watts because we always want to do the most. Whereas I think a lot of the times, sometimes we underestimate how much stress we're under day to day, and then the amount of stress that we put on our bodies during training. And it's so hard to find this balance. And part of me wonders whether these guys that are doing so well in cycling at the moment, for example, Primoz, Remco, Jonas, Tadej, whether either they're just genetic freaks or they're very self-aware at being able to check in with themselves and find that perfect balance. So I think a lot of the times it's maybe not the person that does the most training or executes everything perfectly. And maybe you'd be surprised if you saw some of the world tour training programs that people have and you compare them as an amateur cyclist, that maybe you're doing close to the same amount of volume or the same amount of intensity as a world tour guy that's his job every single day, and you're doing that alongside trying to work or alongside trying to parent or alongside all these other stresses. And a lot of the times I think it's trying to find that balance of, I'm looking for a saying that I can't quite think of, getting the least amount of work for the maximum amount of reward. There's a smart saying there that I'm not quite remembering, but basically minimum effective dose. That's what I was looking for. But it's so hard because a lot of us got to this level because we wanted to work hard and because we did hard things. But that's maybe not the key to success. And I think that's one of the areas in World Tour cycling that maybe there's the biggest room for improvement. A lot over the last couple of years that cycling had a very big improvement in nutrition and personalized nutrition, and also just better understanding of nutrition. And now I think people are eating much more than we previously were, both off and on the bike. And that's led to better recovery in training, better recovery in races, but also being able to perform the same after hour 1, after hour 4, or as close to as possible. But I think there's still a lot of room there for understanding how to get the best physical performance out of each athlete, because each athlete has a different way of getting there. And I think it's going to be very hard to get there, because there's so much hype about lactate, or there's so much hype about certain types of measurements. But I think a lot of the time it's our human bodies, they're very hard to measure or very hard to understand. And maybe one day we'll get to a Whoop band or an Oura ring or a continuous lactate monitor that is actually very good at helping us make that decision. But at the moment now, I think we have a lot of these data points. For example, the continuous glucose monitor that Super Sapiens and a lot of other companies were producing. We tested them a little bit inside the team and they gave cool numbers, but we had no idea what to do with that number yet. We were just basically collecting data, trying to look for trends, but it was very hard. And I think now Super Sapiens has stopped that program. And I think we're in the process of data collection. Same with the Whoop or same with the Oura. You can get HRV, you can get all these metrics, but to get a very clearly defined correlation between a certain data point and how you're actually feeling and to prescribe what you need for the next day, we're not quite there yet. And maybe we will be in the future. But yeah, at the moment, it still comes down to the athlete checking in with themselves. Anyway, that was just a bit of a random monologue because I've been sitting in my kitchen now procrastinating about going to the gym before I need to go out and do a 3-4 hour training ride. And I thought I'd record this and let's see what you think. And if you like this random monologue talking about myself, I guess, then let me know and then I can try and produce some more content like this. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. And as always, leave your feedback in the Discord channel or message me on Instagram or however you want to reach out. And thanks for listening.